I'm looking to unload this green critter. You buying or what?
I don't buy humans.
Gideon Thorne had laid 3 people in the earth with his own hands and never wept once, not at the graveside, not after, not even alone. Then came the morning an orc woman was pushed across the market dust toward him, as if she were a debt to be settled before noon, and something inside that scarred old mountain of a man shifted where the whole town could see it. Before we go any farther, if you believe a bent man can still carry the truest heart in the borderlands, subscribe to Baba Yaga Universe right now. Press the like button. Tell me what state, city, or country you're listening from, because what happens next, what one limping human recluse does for an orc woman everyone else had already thrown away, is the sort of thing people carry in them for years. The bell in Briar Hollow struck 8 when they brought Vasha Merren into the square. The first thing she did was turn for her sister. Clara. She said it softly, the way a soldier says the name of a saint she no longer expects to answer. Clara, look at me. But Clara would not. The girl stood half hidden behind her mother's shoulder, fingers twisted in her apron, eyes fixed on the flagstones. That was answer enough. Evelyn Merren turned with her gloves folded neat at the waist. She wore her dark Sabbath dress, silver brooch, good boots. She looked like a woman attending a blessing, not selling her husband's daughter by a first marriage. Must you make a scene? Evelyn asked. You'll disgrace this house. Vasha gave a short, cracked laugh. Which house would that be? The one my father built, or the one you've spent 2 years scraping me out of? You are not being sold. Evelyn's mouth thinned. You are being placed. A grown woman ought to know the difference. The crowd had gathered in the usual way small towns gather when cruelty presents itself respectably. Men came from the smithy and grain store. Women paused outside the cloth stall and apothecary. A pair of boys stood on a water trough to see better. Nobody raised a hand. Nobody said no. They only watched. Vasha looked from face to face. Green skin, strong shoulders, small tusks pressed tight against the heat in her jaw. She had spent 24 years in Briar Hollow learning to read human silence properly. It was a skill you developed when half the room wished you invisible and the other half wished not to be caught noticing. Old Mistress Bell, who had once sold her mother blue thread and lamp oil. Master Rowan at the mill, who used to slip her sugared walnuts when she was small enough to be charming. The potter's wife who borrowed salt, the widower whose roof her father had mended, the baker who never forgot a debt. They did not look cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to bear. What she saw on their faces was relief. The orc woman was leaving. The square would be tidier for it. Where, Vasha asked, where exactly am I being placed? Evelyn did not answer. She did not need to. At that moment, a mule cart rolled down the north road, and all the low murmur in the square went still as prayer before a blade. Saints preserve us, someone whispered. Well, he came. I thought that man only came down for salt, nails, and powder. That's how you know she meant business. The cart stopped at the edge of the market, and the driver climbed down. He came off the seat slowly, and he came off it wrong. His left leg would not trust the earth straight away. He swung it a little, caught the wheel with one broad hand, steadied himself, then rose to full height. He was tall in the shoulders, thick through the chest, older than Vasha by a fair measure, with weather in his face and a scar pulling from temple to jaw beneath graying stubble. Human, unmistakably. When he lifted his head and looked across that square, half the crowd seemed to remember urgent business elsewhere. That's Thorne, someone breathed. North Ridge Thorne. The widower. The one who married an orc. Hush. Vasha had heard the story since childhood. Every child in Briar Hollow had. The hermit in the pines, the man with blood on his hands, the cripple who never smiled, the one who had come down from the high ridge years ago with an orc bride no decent town would welcome and kept to himself ever since. But Vasha knew what the town never said plain. They did not call Gideon Thorne a monster because of the scar, or the limp, or the silence. They called him that because his wife had been an orc woman, and he had loved her in the open. That sort of honesty had never sat well in Briar Hollow. He halted 10 feet away. His eyes went first to Evelyn, then to Clara, then last to Vasha, where they remained for one heartbeat longer than politeness required, not appraising, not hungry, something else, something like recognition, though they had never met. "Mrs. Merren," he said. His voice was low, worn with disuse. "You sent word to Haver's store, said there was a woman in danger of being turned out before. Ye Winter said she was of age, willing, and able-bodied enough for ridge work." Evelyn's smile returned, bright and false as glazed sugar. "And here she stands, strong hands, sound health. She can sew, cook, tend beasts, keep stores, weed a garden, and work longer than most men. You'll not do better, Master Thorne, not for the silver discussed." The silver. Vasha felt that word hit inside her like a fist dropped down a well. Evelyn drew out a leather purse and held it up where all could see. "You sent 30 silver stags in good faith. Generous, I'll say. My late husband left obligations. A widow must be practical in this world." Then she held the purse toward him, palm open, as if offering him the weather. "There, she's yours." The square lined forward as one body. Vasha stood with both hands locked in her skirts so nobody would see the shaking. She thought, with a strange cold clarity, so this is how it ends. Not with chains, not with screaming, with a woman in a fine dress holding out a purse under a clean morning sky and calling it practical. Gideon Thorne looked at the purse a long time. Then he stepped forward on that uneven leg, took Evelyn's wrist in one scarred hand, folded her fingers back over the coin, and pressed the purse hard against her own chest. "I don't buy people, ma'ams." The square went dead. Evelyn blinked. "I beg your pardons." "You heard me." He did not raise his voice. That somehow made it worse. "I sent silver because a note came to the store saying there was a soul in this town about to be cast into snow with nowhere to go. I sent it because I've got a roof, work to be done, and enough conscience left not to watch a person freeze if I can help it. I did not send it to purchase a woman from her own kin like she was a winter mare." He released her hand. "Keep your money and take your hand off her." Vasha realized then that Evelyn had fastened a grip on her arm hard enough to bruise. "Master Thorne," Evelyn said, "you do not understand the circumstances. She cannot remain in my house. I have my own daughter's future to think on." Her lip curled then because she wanted witnesses. It is always easier to commit ugliness when others help you name it wisdom. "This woman is orc-blooded," Evelyn said loudly. "Look at her. She was born of one. She carries it plain as day. I will not have an orc under my roof forever, and I will not let my daughter's prospects rot under the same stain." There it was. Not difficult, not troublesome, not unfortunate. Lork. Wrong blood, wrong skin, wrong claim on mercy. Somewhere in the crowd, someone made the smallest nod, quick and involuntary. Vasha saw it. She saw all of it. Then Gideon turned his head and looked over the square. He said nothing at first. He only looked, moving slowly from one face to the next, and one by one people found their boots suddenly interesting. He looked until every eye dropped. Then he turned back. "I've been called many things in this town," he said, "most of them unfit for temple walls, monster, beast lover, devil, fair enough. Folks do enjoy a story when they're too cowardly for the truth." He lined in just a little. "But I'll tell you this, not one person in this square has ever done before me a crueler thing than what you just did to that woman, and you did it wearing your holy pin." Evelyn went white to the mouth. Gideon straightened and addressed the crowd. "And the rest of you," he said, "stood watching as if this were a goat auction. Not one of you said stop. You know why? Because if she'd looked like your daughters, one of you would have found a spine. But she's green and tusked and born of an orc mother, so suddenly it isn't selling, it's placing, it's necessity, it's common sense." He let the words settle like cold ash. "You ought to be ashamed of yourselves, but shame requires a person to look at what he is. Briar Hollow gave that up the day it decided orc blood counted for less than human comfort." No one answered. Vasha stood in the center of the square and stared at the man everyone feared, and felt, for the first time since her father died, the fierce astonishment of being defended. Not pitied, not handled, defended. There is a difference. Pity sees weakness, defense recognizes worth. Then Corbin Pike came down from the counting house steps, heavy in the belly and smooth in the face, gold rings flashing on his fingers. He ran half the notes in the valley and all the petty ruin. "Before anyone departs," Pike said pleasantly, "there remains the matter of debt. The late Master Merren owed considerable sum against grain failure and levy shortfall. His widow has been making arrangement where she can. As I understand it, this woman's labor was to stand in place of coin, making her, in a manner of speaking, security." Vasha went cold. She looked at Evelyn and saw the truth naked at last. The silver was not for bread, not for Clara, not for winter stores. It was Pike. Les. They were paying the banker with her body and calling it bookkeeping. "You sold me to settle paper," Vasha said. "Not to Evelyn, not to Pike, to the air itself. You did not even sell me for yourself." Gideon turned fully toward the banker. "There is no border charter, no blood law, no king's decree that allows one living soul to be posted as collateral on another soul's debt," he said. "You know it, I know it, and every man in the square knows it." Pike's smile thinned. "This is a private financial matter." "No," Gideon said, "it was private right up until you tried to turn a woman into livestock in the market." His voice remained quiet, and the day somehow got colder around it. "Here's the shape of it, Pike. She is not part of your note, she never was, and if you try to make her part of it, I will ride to Alderkeep myself and lay every word of this before the March magistrate, from the silver purse to your present little speech." Pike's jaw flexed. "This is not done, Thorne." "Reckon we'll see." Then Gideon did a dangerous thing in a small town. He turned his back on the banker before the matter was settled. He looked at Vasha. For the first time, he spoke to her and not around her. "Miss," he said, and his voice gentled by a degree that startled her, "I'm sorry we're meeting in the middle of this." He tipped his chin toward the North Road. "My name's Gideon Thorne. I've got a stead on North Ridge. Cabin, buyer, 40 head, too much fence and not enough knees. The work is hard. The winters are harder. I won't lie to you about either, but I can tell you what it is not." He met her eyes square. "It is not a sale. You are not bought. You are not owed. You are not mine. If you come up that ridge, you come as a free woman for honest wages. And the day you wish to leave, you leave. No man, myself included, has the right to say otherwise. Vasha stared at him. I have nothing, she whispered. She let me bring nothing. Something crossed his face then, brief as a candle gutter and just as revealing. Grief, old grief, freshly touched. Then there's nothing to fetch, he said, and no reason to keep standing among jackals. He stepped aside, deliberately slow, opening the way to the cart without laying a hand on her. The cart is there if you choose it. No hurry, I'll wait. And he did. That more than anything stayed with her later, not Pike's rings, not Evelyn's purse, not the silence of the crowd. The fact that a scarred human everyone called monstrous stood in the market dust on a bad leg and waited for an orc woman to decide her own life. Vasha looked once more at Clara. Her sister's eyes were wet now. Vasha, Clara whispered, I'm sorry. I know, Vasha said, be careful. Clara took a step forward, but Evelyn's hand closed on her shoulder and held her fast. So Vasha turned, set her spine straight, lifted her chin, and crossed the square toward the waiting cart. The crowd moved out of her paths. No one said farewell. The town fell away behind them by degrees. The road bent north through fir and stone and began its slow climb into the high country. Vasha sat beside a stranger, fists in her lap, and held herself together until Briar Hollow vanished behind the trees. Then she broke. She wept with all the silence she had denied herself in the square. Gideon let her. He did not tell her to hush. He did not say empty things like it will be all right. He did not crowd the hurt with chatter because he could not bear stillness. He only drove, hands steady on the reins, eyes forward. He gave her the mile it took to come apart and another mile to gather herself again. When her breathing at last steadied, he waited a respectful span before speaking. What shall I call you? He asked. Vasha, Miss Merren, something else. Vasha, she said. My father called me Vash. Nobody else does. Vasha, then. They rode a while in companionable quiet. Pine, wind, mule harness, wheel over stone. Finally she said, Why did you do it? Which part? The silver, coming down, any of it. You could have hired a man. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might leave it unanswered. Because the note said nowhere to go before winter, he said at last, those words matter to me. His hands tightened once on the leather and eased. I know what a ridge winter does to a body without shelter. I know what happens to folk who run out of doors before the snow does. I've buried some. So when I hear there's a person about to become one more mound in frozen ground, I tend not to ask first what color their skin is. She studied the edge of his face, the scar, the weathering, the careful angle of the leg he kept slightly away from the cart-board. They said you were dangerous. I know. They said you killed a man. Something old closed over his features, not anger, older than anger. I've never raised my hand against anyone who wasn't trying to put his own on someone weaker first. He said, and I never will. Then, because he was an honest man and honesty sometimes hurts more than deceit, he turned and looked directly at her. You're going to be alone with me on that ridge for a good while. I'd be a coward if I did not tell you plain. You were in greater danger in that square this morning than you will ever be under my roof. Vasha listened for the second meaning beneath the first. There wasn't one. There were only the words. So she asked the question burning hardest. Are you afraid of orcs? He went still, but not with calculation, with care. My wife was an orc, he said. 3 words, 1 sentence, the whole world rearranged. Vasha turned to him outright. Her name was Brakka, Stonejaw clan. We were married 8 years. She died 3 winters ago on that ridge. His voice flattened with that careful evenness people use when they have made peace with being doubted. That is the true reason Briar Hollow names me Monster, not the scar, not the leg. I loved an orc woman where everyone could see it, and the town never forgave me for loving rightly. The cart topped a rise then, and the land opened before them. Cabin, byre, split-rail fencing, a vegetable plot gone half wild, highland cattle on the slope, wind moving through the firs like old speech. Vasha looked ahead and understood, all at once, that the man sent to purchase her was the only soul in Briar Hollow who knew exactly what it meant to love someone the world said should not be loved. Gideon glanced at her once, then back to the ridge. "Welcome," he said, "for as long as you wish it." There are things Vasha learned about Gideon Thorne in the first week that nobody in Briar Hollow knew, or else never bothered to care about. He read, for once. That surprised her most. There were shelves in the cabin, actual shelves, not crates, holding histories, border law, weather almanacs, herbals, stock manuals, and a book of poems with a broken spine. He read by lamp after supper the way some men drink, steadily, without ceremony, because it kept worse things at bay. He cooked abominably. His notion of stew was meat boiled until flavor fled in fear. Bread, when attempted, came out heavy enough to repair a wall. When Vasha quietly took over the cookfire, not from duty, but because she could not endure another noble venison haunch dying a second death in his pot, he did not bristle. He looked relieved. Brakka cooked, he said one evening, over nettle broth and barley cakes. Not like a cook doing a task, like the meal mattered. Meals do matter, Vasha said. I know, he answered. I'd simply forgotten. He said things like that, small truths, honest spare, never wrapped for effect. Then he would fall silent, as if he had used up his ration of speech for the day. Vasha learned his leg, how cold made the knee seize, how he shifted weight without making a performance of pain, how he used a gate post, table edge, or cart rail when he thought no one was looking. He never complained. It was a fact, no different than her tusks, his scar, winter coming. She learned his grief in fragments. Grief never unfolds politely. It drops out of a man in the middle of practical sentences. Brakka used to mend that harness strap a different way. Before Brakka died, we'd set beans here. Brakka said the ridge talked louder before storms. He loved that woman still. Vasha saw it not in speeches but in maintenance, in the repaired latch on the cupboard, in the extra peg by the door, in the shawl folded clean in cedar, in all the shapes a life leaves behind when it was built for 2 and forced down to 1. The cabin told the rest. On the second evening, Gideon left to water the stock and forgot to close the sleeping room door. Vasha passed it, glanced in, and stopped dead. The clothes first. A deep green tunic hung from a peg, broad through the shoulders and cut for an orc woman's frame. Beside it, a winter wrap woven in the interlocking diamond style of the southern clans, trousers stoutly sewn, a leather belt too wide for any human waist, carefully kept, not abandoned, preserved. They would fit her. She knew it before she touched them. Then she saw the bed, reinforced oak frame, wider built, the doorway itself slightly broader than standard human measure, the hooks set higher, the washstand sturdier. Every detail told the same story. This had been made for an orc woman by a man who had loved one enough to notice what her body needed. And above the bed, carved into the wall log, half finished, ran a clan ward. Vasha knew that work at once. Not the exact dialect of Brakka's people, but the grammar beneath it. Orc hearth cuts, protection signs, the old honor marks women carved into beams and thresholds to bind a household to the living and the dead alike. Brakka had started the blessing and never finished it. The circle remained open. 3 winters. Unclosed. I left it, Gideon said from the doorway behind her. Hey. Stood well back, as he always did when he feared startling her. I could not bring myself to clear her things. If you'd rather I move them, I will. Don't. The word came out before she weighed it. Please. She took the green tunic from the peg. The cloth was soft with long wear, carrying the faint scent of cedar and bitterleaf soap, the same sharp herbal trace her own mother used when Vasha was little. A scent Evelyn had scrubbed from the Merren house the year she married in and began replacing every orc thing with human things under the name of order. May I wear them? Vasha asked. Gideon's expression changed by almost nothing at all. They're clothes, he said. Clothes ought to be worn. She changed after he went back outside. The tunic fit exactly. Of course it did. When she faced the little mirror above the basin, green skin in green cloth, shoulders finally falling right beneath a seam instead of fighting it, waist belted where an orc woman's shape expected it, she saw something she had not seen in many years. Not herself. It's her mother. Gideon gave her the cabin and moved himself to the loft over the byre. He said it as if such a thing required no praise. There's a stove in the loft and I've slept rougher, he told her. Only later did Vasha understand how much thought had already gone into that decision. The cabin door barred from within, windows latched, 40 paces to the byre, close enough to call, far enough to breathe. The next morning he knocked twice and called through the wood. Cows still need milking, whether the world deserves it or not. She was dressed and out in moments. 2 years under Evelyn had taught her that the person who slept while others worked did not remain welcome long. Gideon was already at the fire, and when he saw how fast she'd come, something tightened in his face. That was invitation, he said, handing her a tin cup, not command. I don't lie in bed while there's work waiting. No, he said quietly, I reckon you don't. Even then he turned the cup so the handle faced her and took care not to brush her fingers. Vasha had known men who thought ahead. They had never thought ahead about her comforts. He showed her the cattle, the tools, the feed shed, the spring line. He taught without impatience. Once plainly, then he stepped back and let her learn. And here was the thing Gideon had not expected. Vasha was stronger than he was. Not in spirit, in body. She was orc-blooded and in her full strength, with the dense muscle and endurance the clans had bred over generations of rough country and harder law. Fence posts that made his bad leg tremble she lifted clean. Hay bales he wrestled one at a time, she moved in pairs. A stone retaining wall behind the byre that had half collapsed and sat untouched for 2 years because he no longer had the leverage for it, Vasha rebuilt in an afternoon. Gideon watched, leaning against a rail, and when she finished, he did not look wounded in pride. He looked grateful. I've hated that wall for months, he said. You're welcome. He studied the straight-laid stone, then said the thing many men would sooner choke on. You're stronger than me. I'm an orc woman, she replied. I'm aware. There was no bitterness in it, only fact. Brakka could carry a yearling under one arm and still smack me for forgetting the lantern under the other, he said. I used to think that was what real strength looked like, not showing off, just doing what needed doing. She sounds formidable. She was ordinary, Gideon said, and his eyes gentled. In the finest sense of the word, she wanted an ordinary life on hard ground with an ordinary man. The world should have let her have it. He pushed off the rail. Coffee's getting cold. If this story has you with me, press like for Baba Yaga universe, because the true heart of a tale like this is never only the rescue. It is what grows after, when two wounded people discover that peace can feel stranger than pain. By the 5th day, Vasha stopped bracing. She did not know she had been doing it until the habit loosened, the constant readiness in the shoulders, the jaw, the nerves, waiting for the sharp word, the sigh, the look that meant inconvenience. Northridge held none of that. It held work, weather, silence, and the simple dignity of being useful. On the 7th day, she caught herself humming while weeding the garden. The sound startled her. She stopped at once, ashamed of her own mouth, as if joy were a betrayal. Clara was still under Evelyn's roof. Her father was still dead. Her mother had been gone 17 years. What right had she to hum? Gideon, on the porch mending a halter, looked up. "You can sing here," he said. "It feels wrong." "Happiness doesn't cancel sorrow," he said. "They can sit at the same table. I've watched them do it." So after a time she began again, softly this time. An old clan melody her mother had sung over bread dough and wash water. As the notes came back worn by years, but the bones of them held. Gideon listened and did not speak over it. The garden became hers without anyone ever saying so. Gideon's knees could no longer take the kneeling, and 3 seasons had let the beds go ragged. Vasha set them right: beans, turnips, onion, bitterleaf, firemint. She found a crock of preserved seeds in the pantry, Brakka's hand-labeled packets in a script Vasha could half read, and planted those too. One afternoon, with dirt beneath her nails and sweat cooling under Brakka's tunic, Vasha sat back on her heels and realized something so clean and shocking it took her breath. She was happy. Not safe for the moment, not relieved, happy. The kind of happiness born of useful hands, open air, honest labor, and the knowledge that when she stood, nobody would tell her she had stood wrongly. "My mother would have loved this garden," she said without thinking. From the yard, Gideon called back, then put her in it. She made a cedar stake and carved a name with careful cuts. Zella, her mother's herb row. 2 orc women already lived on that ridge in memory and mark, Brakka in the wall, Sella in the soil, Vasha between them, keeping both from being erased. Trouble arrived on the 9th day. 3 riders came up the track just before noon, splashing through the ford without so much as a halloo. Pike's men, led by Rafe Toland, a long, dry man with a smile that never reached his eyes. They reined in by the fence and looked at Vasha the way collectors look at a thing they once failed to seize. "This the woman?" Rafe asked, "the one you played hero for in the square?" Gideon came out of the byre, wiping his hands on a cloth. He stood easy, but still, a kind of stillness Vasha had come to understand. It was not helplessness, it was measure. "Vasha," he said without taking his eyes off them, "go inside." She did not. She came to stand a little behind him and to his right, close enough to stand with him, far enough not to hamper his bad leg. Rafe laid out the pretense smooth as butter: decency concerns, questions raised in town about an unmarried orc woman dwelling alone with a human widower, blood law propriety, moral hazard, for her own protection. Perhaps she ought to come back under supervision until the matter could be sorted. Vasha heard herself answer before fear could take hold. No. Rafe blinked. No, she said again, stronger. I am of age. I am here by my own word, earning honest wages. There is no charter, temple rule, nor clan law that gives Corbin Pike claim over my person. Tell him I decline his protection. I know what sort of thing he means by it. Silence. Then Gideon said mildly, that about covers my own view. Rafe's smile slipped. You're both making a mistake. Maybe, Gideon said, but it'll be ours. Then he took one step forward, and the horses shifted under their riders. Tell Pike, Gideon said, I know what lies under this ridge. It was the smallest flicker, quick as a fish scale in light, but Vasha saw it, so did Gideon. A bluff, she thought. Then she saw his face and knew it was not a bluff at all. Rafe gave a short nod, turned his horse, and rode out with the others. The moment they vanished between the firs, Vasha's legs gave, and she sat down hard in the garden path. Gideon lowered himself beside her with a grunt and a wince he did not bother to hide. You did well, he said. I'm shaking. That's because your body knows you've done something brave. She laughed once breathlessly. I did not feel brave. Most truly brave people don't. That evening, as the light went amber on the western slope, he told her the rest. There was moon silver under North Ridge. A long mineral seam running beneath his grazing ground and half the stone ledge below the cabin. Enough wealth to turn honest men covetous and crooked men murderous. Pike had been quietly gathering land for years through debt and law paper, especially orc homesteads in the border marches, where clan families knew blood oaths better than human contracts and signed what they were told. He took 6 clan farms south of Hollow Ford, Gideon said, staring into the fire. Men and women who thought a mark witnessed by a temple clerk meant fairness. He wrote the terms to fail them. And now he wants your ridge. He's wanted it since the assay men passed through 5 years back. Gideon rubbed at his knee. But I owed nothing, wanted nothing, and kept to myself. Then in that square I did a foolish thing. You did a decent thing. I made you the only lever he had. Vasha turned on him then, sudden and fierce. Don't you dare apologize to me for being the first honorable man in that town. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he bowed his head once. Fair enough. Summer leaned into autumn. The ridge asked its due and received it. Fence repaired, hay cut, stock turned, root cellar filled. Days grew sharper and with each one Gideon end. Vasha learned the shape of working beside each other. They did not fit like 2 broken halves. That was too weak a thing to say of either of them. They fit like tools forged for different uses in the same hand. Her strength, his knowledge, her endurance, his patience, her clan memory, his weather sense, each complete, better together. One night, perhaps 6 weeks in, Vasha stood staring at Brakka's unfinished wall carving while the lamp burned low. The open circle bothered her more each day. She knew the old cut language, not Brakka's exact clan dialect, but enough to read intent, depth, direction. She took up a small knife and studied the old lines a very long time, the angle of entry, the lift, the pressure. She would not finish it in her own hand if she could help it. She would finish it in Brakka's. It took hours. Slow work, patient work, matching old stroke to new until the pattern widened, turned, and closed. Shelter, welcome, claimed hearth, the right of a family to remain where love had planted it. When she set the blade down, the circle was complete. Brakka's beginning. Vasha's ending. One unbroken sign. Gideon found it at dawn when he brought in a bucket of milk. He stopped dead beneath the wall. His hand rose and touched the carving, fingers following old grooves into new ones, unable to tell where one woman's labor had ended and another's begun. "Did you do this?" he asked. Vasha stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "She started it," Vasha said. "I only brought it home." His hand remained on the wood. When he turned, his eyes were bright. Vasha had never seen him cry. She understood at once that almost nobody had. "She would have liked you," he said. "I know," Vasha answered gently. "I think I would have liked her too." He nodded once, set the milk on the table, and went back outside before the grief could shame him. In late harvest month, the post-rider brought a letter. It was for Vasha. She knew the hand before she broke the seal, small, uncertain, earnest. Clara. Vasha stood under the porch roof and read. "Mother cleared your room. She burned your dresses, books, and the letters father saved in the chest. She said it was cleaning. I know it was not. I got there before she found everything. I hid your mother's pendant, the silver clan wheel with the blue stone, the one you used to hold when you missed her. I hid it where she will not look. One day I will bring it to you. I promise. I am sorry I was afraid. I am trying not to be any more. Your sister, Clara." Vasha folded over the letter and wept. Not from fresh grief, from relief so keen it hurt, because cruelty had not managed to destroy everything, because one frightened human girl raised in a house of hatred had still looked at an orc mother's pendant and thought, "This matters. This must be saved." Gideon did not ask for the letter. He waited until she could speak. "She saved my mother's clan wheel," Vasha said. He nodded once, as if such courage from a child ought to be honored plainly and without surprise. "Then your sister has more steel in her than that house deserves." The blow finally came in Frostwine. Pike moved by writ and seal, with sheriff, clerk, and all the machinery men use when they want theft to look official. What Pike had not counted on was this. Gideon had not lived with an orc wife for 8 years and buried her for 3 without learning the roads her people kept. He had sent word south weeks earlier. So when the case was heard before the March magistrate at Alder Keep, they came. Not raiders, not blades, witnesses. Orc men and women of the southern clans, elders, holders of memory, families whose farms Pike had stripped under paper they had never properly understood. They stood in the hall in clan wool, iron armbands, winter furs, and testified one after another. Contracts misread, terms concealed, interest multiplied in bad faith, titles transferred under duress. For once in borderland history, human testimony and orc testimony stood side by side and were weighed as if both belonged to living people. Pike lost everything that mattered. The magistrate voided the false claims. The seized homesteads were restored. The debts fell apart under scrutiny like rotten cloth. Moonsilver on North Ridge remained Gideon S. Pike, who had built his power on the belief that orc voices would never carry weight in a human chamber, discovered how brittle power becomes the day it is truly named. When spring thaw came, Vasha rode back into Briar Hollow by choice. Not because she needed closure, because she wanted to test whether the town still fit around her or whether she had outgrown it entirely. The square looked smaller than memory, same well, same awning over the baker's stall, same worn stone where she had once stood while a purse was held out and men said nothing. She tied Gideon's bay mare outside Bell's dry goods and went in. Mistress Bell looked up. Time had folded the Woma. and smaller but not gentler. Vasha set 3 coppers on the counter. My mother used to buy buttons here, she said. Belle's gaze went from the coins to Vasha's face, to Brakka's tunic on her shoulders, and back again. I remember your mother, Belle said softly. Sella was a good woman. Vasha stood very still. No one in Briar Hollow had said that in years. No one had spoken of her mother like a person worth honoring rather than a mistake worth forgetting. Thank you, Vasha said. Belle wrapped the buttons in brown paper and pushed them over the counter. She did not take the money. On the house, she said, tell her I said so if the dead are listening. When Vasha stepped back into the square, she looked around once and understood the truth at last. The town had never been too large to defeat. She had simply been too lonely inside it. Gideon was on the porch when she returned to the ridge. He always waited without hovering, a gift rarer than most people knew. How was town? He asked. Small, she said. He smiled then, a real one, brief, weathered, and worth the wait. She sat beside him on the step, not opposite, not across a careful distance, beside him, close enough that her shoulder touched his. Gideon, she said, I finished something today. What was that? I went back to the square, bought buttons from Belle's shop. She remembered my mother, said she was a good woman. Gideon sat quiet a while, looking out over the slope where evening light was turning the grass to bronze. Took them long enough, he said. Some things do. Yes, he said, they do. She leaned a little more of her weight against him. This part matters too, so stay with me. The first time Vasha touched Gideon on purpose was not on that porch. It was months earlier, after Rafe Toland rode off and the shaking left her weak in the knees. Gideon had sat in the dirt beside her, saying little, letting fear spend itself. When he rose, the leg betrayed him for half a breath. Vasha stood first and held out her hand. Green palm open, strong fingers steady. He looked at it as if it were something sacred he had no right to assume. Then his broad, scarred hand closed around hers. Warm, careful, rough from rope and weather and work. She braced, pulled, he came upright. For 1 second they were standing close, her hand in his, both of them a little startled by how ordinary it felt. The sort of contact Briar Hollow called contamination. The ridge called it what it was. A human skin. Orc skin. No thunder, no judgment, no corruption, only touch. He let go first. Thank you, he said. You're welcome. Neither of them spoke of how hard the letting go had been. By the time summer returned to the upper pasture, their silences had changed. No longer the wary stillness of strangers sharing air. This was the easy quiet of 2 people who had learned each other's weather. One starlit evening, long after Pike's fall and Clara's letter and the spring ride to town, Vasha sat beside Gideon on the porch and asked the question she had been carrying for months. When you said welcome on the cart that first day, she said, did you mean it? He was silent a long while. As much as I knew how, he answered, which wasn't all the way, I didn't know you yet. And now. He looked toward the house Brakka had blessed, Vasha had completed, and both of them had kept standing. He looked at the garden where Sella's herbs grew beside Brakka's bitterleaf and Vasha's beans, at the fence line they had raised together, at the life made slowly from work and grief and stubborn decency. Now, he said, I mean it to the bottom. He turned to her then, and there was no flinching in him. No condition this time. No for as long as you wish it. No until better comes along. His voice went quiet. Stay, Vasha, stay as long as I've got. She searched his face, that weathered, scarred, honest face, and found nothing hidden there. Only a man who had loved once, buried dearly, and still found the courage to offer his heart again without trying to own the woman he offered it to. That, she said softly, is the first time you've said it without a door left open. It's the first time I haven't needed one. So she rested her head against his shoulder. And Gideon, after the smallest pause, as if still asking leave even now, tilted his head against hers. The stars burned over North Ridge, the wind moved through the firs. The mountain, which cared nothing for bloodline or scar or the opinions of little frightened towns, held them both. Not monster and cast off. Not warning and stain. A human man, an orc woman, two souls the world had nearly pushed beyond its own edge, choosing in the end not to disappear. The ward on the wall was closed. The circle held. And if you've stayed with me this far, subscribe to Baba Yaga Universe, because stories like this deserve to travel. The cabin still stands on North Ridge. Brakka's cuts are still in the wall, with Vasha's joining them so cleanly a stranger could not tell where grief ended and love began again. The garden has 3 rows now that everyone on the ridge calls by name: Brakka's herbs, Vasha's vegetables, Sella's row. 3 orc women bound to one place by memory, labor, and honor. And beside those names lives Gideon Thorne, the man Briar Hollow called Monster, because he would not learn to be ashamed of who he loved. He loved Brakka as a husband loves a wife. He loved Sella through the stories Vasha told, because he recognized the shape of a woman the world had punished for being orc. And he loved Vasha not as a rescue, not as a duty, not as a wound to be tended until it could walk away, but as the one person who came into his life at the precise hour both of them were in danger of being erased and chose, with him, to remain. That was his answer to the world in the end. If it keeps doing this to orc women, he will keep standing in front of it. Not because he thinks himself brave, because he has buried enough of what he loved. And he means for this one to outlive him.